Today we're going to be talking about Bill 23 and suite additions, how to maximize the value of your properties by adding additional units. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Property Hustle Show. My name is Andrew and today Ping and I are joined by Andy and Deshaun from Suite Additions who are going to share with us their expertise on how to maximize the value on your property, adding additional units. So guys, it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Every time you guys need to take on a garden suite project, is it always going to be very similar?
No, it's going to be very site specific, depending on the, of course, the first thing is the municipality, and then also site constraints, how wide of a site you have, how deep of a site. So every project's going to be unique, but our process right now is actually, the process itself is very similar, right? Like we go into every project looking at the entire site, which is why it was very difficult for us to say, let's focus in on one product, right? Because some people will say, you know what, we're just going to focus on, secondary suites, basements, and then sometimes it's just, converting it to a 4-unit. And some people are just focusing on ADUs, also known as garden suites. But for us, the reason why it's hard for us to niche into just doing garden suites is because then we would be taking away the opportunity in the main house. So what we're looking at primarily is looking at that particular lot and what's there right now and how do we maximize basically its highest and best use.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of how we branded the max suite strategy term into the approach for every homeowner or investor that when they're looking at a property.
Right. So Andy, can you walk us through exactly what kind of checklist would you go through before you determine any highest best use of?
Yeah, absolutely. So we follow this thing that we created called the wealth formula, and wealth is actually an acronym, and the first letter of wealth stands for what you can do. So what you can do really focuses on the zoning aspect and the sort of the city planning side of things. What can we do as of right? Meaning what can be done without any additional permissions, basically going straight to building permit. What's the size of a 2-unit I can do, or a 3-unit, or a garden suite, and really looking at those parameters and say that if there are no constraints, if there are no cost constraints and no other constraints, how many units can I put in here? And then we sort of work backwards from there, looking at, okay, well, does it make sense to do a 4-unit here or a 3-unit or 3-unit plus a garden suite? And then we kind of go down the list of, let's take the existing house, maximize the existing house because you already have an existing structure to convert to multiple units as opposed to building anything new. So we love garden suites. We think they're great. If we can reduce the cost by utilizing the existing structure, that's usually the best return on investment, whether you're a homeowner building additional suites for your family member or whether you're a small investor wanting to build an additional suite as a rental unit.
I see. So when a client comes to you and say, hey, I want to build a garden suite in my property, you're like, oh, wait a second, let's actually look at the zoning for your property. Let's look at your existing structure first, because maybe there's something that you can do first before you jump right into the garden suite.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I would say that like a good percentage of the time, somebody would approach us and say they, in their mind, they said, I want to build a garden suite because I want to get an extra $2,000 or $2,500 in income, right? I always ask them to pause and provide to us what their goals are. Like, what is it you want to achieve here? Like, is it, you just want to make an extra $2,500 or do you want to house a family member? And is there a particular scenario where you might want to have more privacy between you and that family member? So there are certain things that we need to understand, and then we can guide them down that path. Now, if they're intent on doing one specific things because they've already done all the homework, and then that's great because it's less work on us, right? We can go straight to what their goals are. But a lot of times people don't even really know is the best approach. And when we take a look at that entire site and we want to know what their goals are, meet those goals and potentially even exceed those goals. So I can definitely give you an example if you want to get into that. Yeah. We had a client that wanted to, they have a single family home, a bungalow, and they wanted to do 4 units because the bylaws in Hamilton now allow 4 units, right? In their mind, they're thinking, okay, let's build a garden suite. Let's potentially do a second story addition. And, looking at the costs, that's not cheap, right? Whether you're building something new in the backyard or whether you're building a second story addition. I mean, they're investors and their goal really is to maximize their income. And so kind of stepping back and looking at it, it's like, well, you can take the existing property and you can subdivide it inside, run the pro formas for what makes sense, and then approach from there. Now, in this particular case, these investors were very experienced. I didn't even have to kind of tell them. They've come to their own conclusion that they're able to do this. But that's not always the case, right? Some people, they will be very excited about doing a particular project, building a garden suite, but it doesn't necessarily make sense. Every situation is unique, but our approach is always finding out what their goals are and then trying to match that property to the goal.
Okay, before we dive into any like cost per square feet and all that stuff. So you mentioned about the formula's wealth, right?
Yeah.
So what's the next step?
Sure. I kind of went into it. So W was what you can do, kind of looking
Yeah.
at the legal side of it and the city planning side. E stands for the existing property. So what can we do to maximize the existing property? As a matter of fact, I think we have a new video soon.
Dropping soon.
Dropping soon on that.
Stay tuned.
Yeah. A is ancillary structure. Ancillary structure means a structure that is detached from the existing property. So there's no need to look at ancillary structure until you've exhausted the E, which is the existing structure. What can we do there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of cases, the existing structure, you maximize that, and maybe a couple years down the road, there's new policies to allow you to do more. So, for example, Toronto has really shifted their density to, from 2 units to 3 units, and now going to council, they're going to allow potentially 4 units plus a garden suite, so 5 units in total on any residential lot.
Mm-hmm.
So things change very quickly, right? So we want to kind of provision for that. A couple years down the road, things could change quite a bit, right?
Yeah.
So WEA is what we covered. And then L stands for location. Location is obviously, what kind of site we're looking for when we're in property acquisition mode, or if you have something within your existing portfolio that we've identified that is ideal for a particular strategy. And then we get into a little bit of the microeconomics of that particular town that you're looking at. Is there, private or public investment in that area? And then getting into the site itself, what kind of site are we looking for? If you want to do a garden suite, a corner lot, a wide lot, a deep lot, those are sort of things. So we really get into the location. The T is transforming the property. So transforming the property, what we want to avoid is a term that my friend Charles had coined, which is a Frankenhouse. And I think other people have used this. And it's not just about taking this property and just subdividing into 4 units and squeezing it as many people in there, right? We want to make sure this property is a durable, very desirable property for any occupant that's living there in the long term. So how do we transform this to be a place that's somebody wants to live there? Somebody wants to pay a high amount of rent, right? So it takes into account the interior, it takes into account exterior amenity space, it takes into account privacy issues, right? So you already have multiple parties sharing one property. How can you design it to minimize interaction that may be uncomfortable? Laundry space, common entrances, and things like that. So the T is really about transforming it to a very nice property that doesn't feel like this quote unquote Frankenhouse.
And then, by the way, that's a common mistake that a lot of investors make, right? They think that they just need to figure out how to create more units or more room for them to actually get it rented. But when the property is so not desired, then you start having vacancy, right?
Yep.
Which means you lose the stability of the property.
Yeah, people do that in the other sense with student housing. They build these sardine cans, right, and then just jam as many rooms in there as they can. And I think people might do that when it comes to provisioning units in other cases.
Yeah.
By the way, I just want to ask, when you're talking about the existing units, you are ultimately talking about whether or not you can build either not an in-law suite, but an additional unit in the basement suite, or maybe a top floor unit by working with existing structure, not adding an addition onto the building, let's say at the back where you might build like a bachelor apartment.
I actually would be including that as part of the existing structure.
Okay, so
but that would be kind of the last component of it.
Okay.
Utilizing the basement, utilizing the upper floor, and then potentially a rear attached addition or a side addition. I still consider that as part of the existing structure.
Okay.
Because there is less resources involved in that type of method as opposed to building a separate structure.
Yeah.
Right.
So I would include that, but that would be more at the later options.
Right. And so what does H stand for? Like
H.
the very
Okay,
last
so,
one.
H stands for highest return.
Highest return.
So that's
Okay.
where we are really focusing on the numbers. Obviously our background is in design, architecture, making sure the space is well functioning. As investors, we really focus on the numbers, and it needs to make sense. Again, whether it's for an investor, of course, numbers are very important, but even as a homeowner that you want to build something for a family member, right? You're going to be looking at, what kind of viable rent family member support. And then if they don't live there in the future, what can I expect to rent it out for in the future? So looking at the numbers, the return on investment, and just ensuring that investing this time and money into it is going to make sense in the long term. By coincidence, it happens to spell out wealth. I don't know how that happened.
Stars aligned.
It sounds very intentional. You're like, you're trying to put things together, But you know what? One thing I I actually like how you're explaining the whole thing. You try to remove the financial aspect from the very beginning, because sometimes a lot of people think about the ROI and all of a sudden they were like, I don't want to be spending that much money towards a house or whatever. All of a sudden that kind of thinking kills all the creativity with how you can actually visualize with what you can do with a property or a lot. So it's a very interesting way to look at things, because a lot of investors do look at things from the financial aspects from the very beginning.
Yeah, maximizing what is the potential, I guess, is really key part of the analysis portion. So you can at least see what's out there, because money is going to be if you find a good property that you can work at. If you don't have the money, you can find the money probably somewhere in order to do it eventually. But I want to ask just a couple questions, because I feel there's a couple of definitions here that people would generally want to know about in order to understand just suite additions. Generally speaking, when you say an ancillary suite, you mean something that is external. And are we still talking about the garage? Does that include?
Yes, it does. So when I say ancillary structure, I would encompass garage conversion.
Not attached, right?
Yeah, not attached. Under the Planning Act, ancillary actually means separate structure.
Yeah.
So ancillary would be garage conversion, a garden suite, or a laneway suite. It's something that is separate.
So separate from the structure. Okay.
Right.
And then further to that, if somebody wants to build something completely new, is there a different terminology for that? Let's say 2-parcel lot. They have a house on one and they have nothing on the other. It's just empty property. Would that be considered ancillary suite too if you built something there, just completely separate, brand new, not a garage, nothing?
You mean like a shed or a workshop or something?
No, you
like
just
that?
build it completely new. There was nothing there. That would just be like I think you were telling me if somebody was to build like a whole separate house, like a two unit. You're saying in Toronto that somebody can build like a 2-story plus possibly a basement. That's like a whole other house. That would be classified as what?
I guess it depends on the municipality you're in.
Yeah.
Like Toronto calls it garden suites, and certain municipalities call it like ARU, ADU.
Okay.
But it all kind of is the same thing, just a detached structure on a single lot.
Okay. So yeah, that's the thing, because a lot of people use the terms interchangeably, like garden suite, ADUs, if they're just saying adding extra units, right? Like, so I feel like there's a lot of confusion, but when you're actually going through the permitting process, there's probably technical terms that are being used here. So I just want to make sure people aren't getting confused by it. What is the most common, like what's the bread and butter in terms of like what you find, most easy to do or most common to do?
You want to take that one?
Yeah, I would say like second suites would probably be like low-hanging fruit. Very common. Contractors are well aware.
In the existing
Most contractors,
building,
yeah,
right?
Exactly, in the basement, or if you want to do like a vertical split, if it's like a wide enough house. From there, it would probably be like converting an existing garage because the structure is already there. In terms of cost, you just need to make sure that you can connect utilities and then do the interior finishing and make sure that you meet all the bylaw requirements. And then from there, I would say addition. And then after that would probably be a detached structure.
Okay, so it literally follows the wealth acronym, where it's just it starts up with what's easiest going to what's hardest. So I think sometimes people want to do the garden suite because they believe that their existing structure cannot support adding additional units. So they just go to that. Or maybe they thought it was cool and then decided, I can do this because it might be a fun project. But it might not always be affordable. And so you want to work down that list.
I mean, people have been doing, basement suites forever, right? Just not legally. And because we never had the higher end market, if you will, to support that type of living arrangement. So 20 years ago, a basement suite may be for an occupant where a lot of people may view as lower income. In this day and age, there's a lot of regular middle income folks that have regular jobs, perhaps working at a bank or in healthcare, where they can't afford to rent or purchase an entire property, and then they're going to be living in one of these units. And that's why they are demanding. All of the clients that we work with, they focus a lot on the quality, the ones that we put in, right? Like they're nice, good quality finishes, really nice kitchens, stone countertops and things like that, because people want to feel like even though it's not an entire house, even though it's a basement suite, it is kind of a high-end product. Second suites have been around forever, but it's evolved to a point where it is a viable solution. And that's low-hanging fruit because a lot of contractors know how to do them. They just have to do them better now to meet the demand of the market. And then, of course, the other ones that come after would be the ones that Deshaun mentioned, second story and a rear addition and then detached.
When it comes to your clientele base, do you find that you get people coming to you who, let's say, have a multi-unit property, but it's not a legal multi-unit property? So single family home with 3 units, let's say, and then they come to you and they say, what can I do with this? Has there been any changes that now make it easier for people to legalize those properties and or fix things to correct them with the bylaw that just facilitates it easier now? Do you find any of that?
As long as they're able to comply with whatever the zoning is for that particular property. If let's say they're in a zone where they weren't allowed to do 3 units in the past and now they're allowed to do 3 units and there was already 3 units there to begin with,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times we'll go there and we'll have to see and assess on a per case basis whether this is something that, can be easily convertible or whether it's something that's it just doesn't make sense. There's too much work that needs to be redone. It's going to make a lot more sense just to kind of gut it and redo it. It also depends on the zoning there. Was it always designed as a triplex and it just doesn't conform to certain building codes?
No, let's say it was hacked.
It was hacked, right?
Yeah.
We work primarily in the lower residential single family neighborhoods where it's always traditionally been single family. Now people are doing the second suites and then potentially the third suites and then the garden suites as well. But we find that there are some of the higher density areas, like for example, closer to the core of the city, where you have single family homes and traditionally, they may have done those hack projects where they would convert to 3 or 4 units. The approach that we take would be the same, even though we work more with the first one, the former. The approach would be the same. How can we meet all the requirements of the building code, make sure that everything is safe, make sure that we have adequate natural lighting? There are certain things that the site-wise and bylaw-wise, it might be a little bit more challenging because usually it's in a smaller site. But the general attitude from the municipal level is that it's a lot easier than it was before because more people are doing it and we're trending towards where it's more accepting to have these multiple units. If it hasn't been done legally, the municipalities are a lot more reasonable in working with you to retain as much of it as possible, as long as safety is met. They're very reasonable, generally speaking. Some of the other building code items, as long as again safety is met.
When it comes to parking restriction, because Hamilton last summer, they quietly removed some of the restriction. So how's that impacting the investors who's considering adding additional units to the property?
Huge. Yeah, that's been a big game changer, reducing parking requirements or even eliminating parking minimums, right? Because in the past, we've always been required, even when you were to convert a single family to 2, they would always require an additional parking. And then that parking could not be tandem. So you would not be permitted to have one car obstructing the other. And what ends up happening is that we would then have to widen the parking. When you widen the parking, all of a sudden, it's a domino effect because now you have to ensure that you have adequate landscaping. You have to do a curb cut. If you do the curb cut, is there a hydro pole there? Is there a catch basin? Is there a fire hydrant? And then
tree.
Then tree. That is the next thing. Then you have to involve forestry. You can imagine the complexity of these projects. So as soon as they say, I'm going to remove the parking requirements for you, all of a sudden it opens up a lot more opportunity. And it allows a homeowner to make a market-based decision as to whether an additional parking is required, right? So as a homeowner or investor, I will have an understanding as to my tenant or whoever's living there, whether the parking would be required. There shouldn't be a necessity for the municipality to dictate what that parking is. And in many cases, they do provide a second parking space. It just doesn't exactly comply with, 5.8 meters by 2.7 meters. It's an arbitrary number based on, vehicles that were built in the 1950s, right? Yeah. So to allow a market approach for parking is something that makes sense. And I think a lot of city planners recognize that. The fact that they've implemented that in many places, it really has changed. But there's still a lot of municipalities where they still can't get over that. And a lot of neighbor resistance on parking.
Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious that there's a lot of bylaw there that is, I think we can by definition call it archaic, right? In the way that they're implemented. That don't always make a lot of sense. And so I know that there's a lot of push to kind of make some adjustments, but there hasn't been a lot. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about Bill 23 because I think that actually, at least it seems like it will alleviate certain pressures. So when you're looking for properties, let's just say as an investor, you're going to look at something, you want to do some additions, some suite additions to it. Is there any deal breakers, things that you're just I don't want to touch this type of property with this type of problem to tackle because it costs too much or it's not worth the time, the effort, whatever? Is there any red flags that you're just I don't want to look at that? I'm not going to consider this if it has it. For us, it was if we can't widen the driveway or there was a big tree there, we just didn't want to go through the process. What would be it for you?
I think there are certain structural constraints with the property. Just a lot of older homes, like century homes, where there's potentially a lot of structural work involved, things like underpinning and a lot of things where it would be okay if the use remains as is. But then if you're changing the use now to multiple units, some of the challenges may be that, your stair width is not going to be enough. And now that you're doing a change of use, they might ask you to bring it up to today's standard, right? So I generally like to work with post-war and post 1950-ish in terms of the type of properties. Also, the other reason is because you have more space around the property to allow for better site planning, for outdoor amenity space, for water management and things like that. I just find that a lot of older homes with tight lot constraints, especially closer to the core of the cities, those are sort of things that I would say would present more obstacles compared to, you know, a post-war 1955 bungalow in a suburban neighborhood.
So from the, let's say, exterior, when you're walking towards a house, because I know like sometimes when the property is let's say in a lot, the property is at the back of the lot, that really like make a lot of space wasteful, right? So is there anything that you will pay attention to as you're like, let's say, looking for a deal, right? Single family home after 1955, right? Maybe the square footage was already over 1,400 before you even go visit the property. But is there any like setback, like from the front or the side of the property that you would say, okay, that checks off the box, or that's a little too close to the neighbor, so we should move on? Like, what's the deal breaker there?
There are a few actually. So like maybe, for example, like if you're building like a detached structure, making sure you have adequate access to the back to bring, not only for like the tenants that are going to be living there, but also for like machinery, depending on how you're going to go about building it. Making sure that, for example, you meet like the emergency access requirements. Like, is there a meter? Things like a meter between your neighboring property line and like your house.
There has to be a meter between the neighboring property and your house.
So there's a few requirements, but just so you can have adequate amount of space for like emergency access.
And so what is the access requirement that you need to have to the back, let's say? Like
Generally 1 meter.
1 meter?
Wide.
Okay.
Right, to you and your neighboring property
That's
line.
not bad, yeah.
Yeah.
And I believe you have to have from the entrance of the garden, the detached structure to the street line has to be like 45 meters.
That's the fire code, which is access to the street for emergency fire, right? 45
Okay,
meters,
so it can't be more than 45 meters.
Correct.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, it's like 150 feet. I would categorize the decision process into must-haves and nice-to-haves, right? So the must-haves are some of the things that Deshaun just mentioned. If you don't have that 45 meters, or if you don't have the 1 meter access, and you're intent on building a laneway suite or a garden suite, there's no arguments on that, right?
Yeah.
The city plans examiner is going to look at it and says you don't comply, and then you can't do anything. So those things are going to be potentially the deal breakers if I'm intent on building a certain thing. And then the nice-to-haves would be, you know, one thing you just mentioned there, Ping, which is, you know, maybe the house is set back too much and now it's taking up too much space. You know, it's going to be a very small garden suite. That might be one factor. If I have a very wide driveway, as Deshaun had mentioned, I'm able to get heavy equipment in there for construction and even just access, potentially have a car drive right into the back, right? So one kind of interesting opportunity that I see is that there's a lot of homes that are facing big streets. And we know that families don't like to, you know, especially with young kids, they don't want to be on a big street with busy traffic. So if you have a wide, deep lot where you can, you know, drive a vehicle all the way in and turn around and be able to come out on the street, you know, then they have this kind of private oasis in the back, right? If you have, let's say, 125, 150 feet in your lot. So those are kind of the nice to haves. Corner lot, nice to have for multiple reasons, right? Access for construction, but also if you're building a detached garden suite on a corner lot, I've seen a lot of these in the US where they would build this extra home and it's smaller than the main house, but it actually feels and looks like a separate house. There's an imaginary line in there. Actually, no, it's not imaginary line. It's just that they put a fence there. There's no line because it is actually part of one property, but the line is there to kind of demarcate, here's your outdoor space, here's my outdoor space. The owner lives in one unit, rents the other one, and pays for everything with those proceeds, right?
Yeah.
So those sort of things that we're looking at, you know, what's the goal? Making sure that we're able to meet those, both from the policy and the code standpoint, and then also as a functional property.
Once the goal is clear and you guys take on the project, how long does it usually take to go through the whole permit process before you can actually touch the property?
The moment we're on site to do all the data collection and kind of we're always on site kind of taking a look at it, making sure that we answer every question, any questions you guys have or who the client has. We take that information, we bring it back to the office. It probably take about, say, 2 to 3 weeks for conceptuals. Provide the client with conceptual drawings, kind of make sure we check all the boxes, make sure the client's happy with it, make adjustments if needed. And then from there, we would work, if we get the thumbs up, we'll work on the permit design. I would say it probably takes another 3 weeks or so, and then send that back to the client for final approval. And then we'd submit to the city. The city has, I think, a mandate for like 15 business days to get back with the first set of revisions. Sometimes it's before, sometimes it's later. So it just really depends on how busy they are. And they are very busy. So patience for sure. is
especially lately. It's just
yeah.
been every municipality. It's just been delays.
Yeah. And that back and forth process, like what is the average that takes? Because I think that's what a lot of people are concerned about is doing permits when having to deal with the city because, people hear stories of people paying mortgages, people paying bills, especially when you invest or buy a property with this intent and you need to do this.
Yeah.
Right? People find themselves pinched. So what's the average time?
Yeah, I'd say it depends on the project. So if you're doing like a standard like base and suite conversion, if there's not structural work that needs to be done or you're not changing like the HVAC design, I would say like the communication with the city probably be, I don't know, the first set of revisions. Like there'll be minor changes, you send it back, they give it back to the final approved permits right away. But if it's more complex, like say you're building a garden suite, there's a lot of things that are still kind of unknown on both sides. So it just a lot of back and forth.
Yeah. So just to give a general time frame, like from the time we submit the permits, it really depends on the project. On the low end would be 4 weeks, and then potentially 8 weeks on something more complicated. And then if there's additional back and forth, like what Deshaun mentioned, there's structural concerns, there's HVAC things, there's water and sewer issues. I mean, that could take up to 12 weeks.
And then after that point, you're pretty much good to go to start working on the renovation or construction.
Yeah. So what we recommend to people is that if you're able to get a longer closing, that would be ideal because most cities will allow you to start the permitting process as long as you have proof that you own the property when they issue the permit. Some cities will ask for some sort of authorization from the current owner to say that you're allowed to submit a permit essentially on their behalf because they still own the property, right? So we recommend to people, all things being equal, if you can get an extended closing, it makes sense because that during that period of time, you're not incurring the expenses, yet you're able to line up potentially your permits, your contractor, and anything else that needs to be done on site. So we recommend a longer closing. In some cases, of course, there's other factors, right? Price and certain situations, and then you'll have to just kind of include that as your cost of business.
Yeah. If you take all these things into consideration and you go from point A, which is starting the permit process and then going through the construction process, and let's just say you're doing an ancillary suite in the backyard and you have enough space and everything matches, I don't know, let's call it 750 square feet is a reasonable one.
Sure.
How long would the process like that take if somebody is going from A to B on average, right?
I hate to say it, but it just really depends.
Yeah.
Construction methods, season.
What's your average?
So for Andy's garden suite, how long do you think that we started?
The permit didn't take long.
Yeah.
The permit was like a month. The project itself took around 6 months.
6 months.
6-7 months.
I think that's pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
That's not too bad.
Yeah, that's not bad. And I was kind of project managing it myself. I think that if you have a proper contractor or builder that is really pushing the schedule, then it could be even shorter than that, 4 months or something like that. But I would say to most people, especially if it's your first project, allocate at least 6 months, 6 to 8 months is reasonable, just so that you have your funds in place. And if you're able to get it done quicker, then that's a bonus.
No, that's good. That allows somebody to budget at least the time on top of the whatever it is going to cost to actually do it.
10% contingency on time and money, I would say, is a good. Maybe time a little bit more than that.
Yeah, I was going to say that. With time, I always budget like more than
20% or 25%.
Because there can always, especially with the way things are, things can get slower. And as it gets more popular too, it can take longer.
Yeah.
Is there any, let's say, a technique that you guys take or do to communicate with the city, right? That make the whole process a little bit more, time efficient. Because sometimes they're dealing with cities like back and forth. They take their time. It's just a city worker. They don't really care that you have a carrying cost to cover. So they're just taking their sweet time. Is there any approach, any recommended approach that you guys do to really speed out that process?
One thing that we do is after we submit it, their mandate is 10 to 15 days to get back to us. We will try to be as ready as possible within a couple of days to be ready to make any changes. And of course, that's going to be contingent on our client and whether we're able to make decisions quickly. Because sometimes there may be a change that is a little bit more work. But we try our best to schedule it so that we get it back to them right away. Because even though they have that initial mandate, 10 to 15 days, they don't actually have any real mandate after they've already given you feedback. So the quicker you can get back to them, the quicker they can respond. And usually we try to nudge along a little bit because, we've worked on so many projects. We have some direct communication with certain plans examiners, and we'll just send them an email and say, hey, thanks for looking at our file. We've submitted everything back. Any chance you can, there's only a couple of things here. Any chance you can kind of speed up the process? And even though they're not obligated to do that, sometimes it helps, right? So, always be courteous and stay professional. I know it's difficult to do sometimes, right? And, there are times when things call for, you perhaps to be a little bit more on the aggressive side, but that's usually rare, right? Most of the time, you're able to deal with it in a professional manner. And then we try to set our expectations with our clients as well. Sometimes there are certain things that they can get started on, cosmetic work and things like that. So basically, that's kind of one, I guess, technique, if you will.
Yeah.
That was actually one of the next thing I was going to ask was that, is there anything that people can get started on, in preparation or in anticipation of, the permit coming in, right? Let's just say it is taking a little longer, because I have heard of some people taking months in the permitting process, and sometimes it's because revisions just take so long to come back. And sometimes the person on the other end sends you one part of the revision instead of sending all of them all at once. Then you have like way more back and forth than is necessary. And I think that depends on who's on the other end. But is there anything that people can generally start with to kind of like lay the groundwork so they're not just sitting on their hands if they made the permit application?
First of all, like lining up your trades, because good trades are always busy, and probably demolition. Probably get started on demolition.
As long as it's not structural demolition.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like just whatever, cosmetic, wood panel walls,
partition
and things
walls,
like that. Yeah.
If you're doing like a second suite, you could probably get started. If you're not moving any plumbing fixtures or stuff like that, you could probably get started on the main floor. Because just cosmetic.
Okay.
And don't overcomplicate the whole renovation project too, right? Like one thing that I actually learned from you guys is I try to like copy the existing layout to the basement, right? Like if you have the bathroom right above it, that's better, because if there's you can run the plumbing directly to the basement, right? So try to copy the layout. So I think that was a really helpful tip. And also, like, if you don't know how to start or where to start, right? Like sign up for coaching, like the online courses first, or get a free consultation with people who's done that multiple times, because that will really shorten the learning curve.
Yeah, absolutely.
And even before the course, there's like a ton of free content that Andy has provided, just kind of outlining all the steps, not only for second suites, but for garden suites. And it's all free on the internet. So if you have YouTube, if you have access to the internet, you can go on YouTube.
You got to get YouTube.
Yeah,
YouTube.
YouTube.
You get YouTube.
You got to download
Try to
YouTube.
leverage that a little bit.
Yeah.
Just to kind of further expand on your question of what can some people do. We've kind of outlined at a very basic level, getting certain things ready, getting your contractors lined up. Some clients of ours, they might take a certain other approach, which I don't necessarily advocate or recommend, but some of them will do certain work and just they will assume the risk to say, we're going to start this work, but we're not going to close it up so that the inspector can see it. And then if anything happens, they deal with it after, if they have to stop the work or even if they have to pay a small fine. That's their approach, and it's not something I'm advocating, but that's what some people do, right? They take more of the approach of don't ask for permission, but
do it and ask for
beg
forgiveness.
Right?
Yeah.
And again, everybody has different risk tolerance. I'm actually more on the conservative side. I don't like to do things without it, but big dollars here, right?
Yeah.
So people have to kind of make their decision as to what they're comfortable in terms of assuming risk. And if it's not something, you're not tearing down a structural wall, if you're just putting up some framing, some people find that, that's a risk they're willing to take.
Have you looked into tiny homes at all?
Yeah.
I met a guy who was trying to figure out if he could buy just fully made from a tiny home builder, a 1.5 story trailerable home, and he wanted to essentially park it in his backyard, connect it to his house, rent it out until he gets the permit to just kind of plonk it down. And he's trying to figure out whether or not that's feasible. Does that sound like something that can be done?
It certainly can be done. I wouldn't recommend it. There's a lot of risk associated with that, right? Because first of all, building something on a trailer is not subject to the Ontario Building Code or the National Building Code. So if you're finishing that out, you're renting it, and then now you want to plunk it down, well, it has never been inspected, right? So what if at that time the inspector says, well, I've never inspected this. Now you got to rip out all the walls. We got to inspect the wiring, the plumbing, right? ESA has to come in and inspect the...
so you may have to gut your trailer.
Yeah. So I understand, people want to do things and they don't want to wait for, regulation and policy because it's frustrating. But at the same time, you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot, spend $100,000, right? So I find that there's folks that have the right intentions, especially kind of in the tiny home community, and that, they don't want to spend a whole ton of money and they want to be able to build this thing and move it around and take it anywhere they want. It's totally different from what we're doing. We're basically building homes in the same manner as traditional building. It's just that the bylaws have allowed us to make it easier. And these are permanent homes with permanent foundation. So from a financial product going forward, this is going to be something that's more acceptable. A tiny home with wheels where we don't know if financial institutions are going to recognize those, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's riskier. You probably don't want to spend too much money doing that kind of stuff because you don't know what you can do with it. Then just becomes kind of like a commodity, a product, as opposed to an actual financial asset, which is real estate. I'm certainly a big fan of potentially down the road with prefab accessory structures that you can build. but I would not do that thing because it's complicated. You have to really understand the rules, all the utility connections that can get complicated. So
Yeah,
it's not something I would do myself or recommend.
that I feel like is a creative thing. It just happened that I met somebody who was planning on doing that, and and I feel that especially as things are getting easier to do what you're doing, there's no need to be so creative and just do things in a standard way, because why not? But to the point of the utility connection, do you connect to the main utility of the house? Like, for example, sewage. If you have a corner lot, do you need to run it straight to the city, or do you connect it to the existing property?
I would say 90% of the time right now, the requirement is that you have to connect it through the house. Hamilton actually allows you to connect directly to the city. It's more expensive, but I would argue that in the long run, it's probably better for access and maintenance. But it costs more. There's more engineering involved. There's more work because you're cutting out a big section of the street to do the connection. Most other municipalities, actually every other municipality I've worked with, their requirement has been connecting through the house. So you got to work with the utility companies to get that connection happening.
And that applies for sewage, water supply, gas, electricity?
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah,
so you
that
also
would
run
be-
natural gas line from the main property to the ancillary unit.
Depending on how you're heating it.
Yeah, assuming
Yeah.
you're not going for baseboard heaters, you would run.
Correct. Yeah. Baseboard or heat pumps, like mini split heat pumps, are very popular as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So assuming you don't use that, then a gas line would make sense.
Which sometimes with smaller spaces like that, like 700 square feet, is actually not going to be that much to heat such a unit. And especially if you build it from scratch, insulate it nicely, it's going to do very well.
Correct. Yeah. But you still probably want to have at least 100 amp service going to the garden suite because you have all these other things that are going to consume power as well,
Okay.
right?
So you almost always upgrade the main panel to 200 amp.
Yeah. If you're building a garden suite, you would
Yeah.
definitely need 200 amps.
Anything above 1 unit, I would recommend to do like the 220 right away, just
It
because.
depends, if possible. Yeah.
Yeah.
200 amps.
By the way, speaking of the cost, what is the average cost that the investors, especially in Ontario, can expect on doing the additional suite to the basement or extension to the back, or let's say garden suite? Like if we're just giving out a bit of a price estimate.
And I don't know if we should separate the permit cost from the construction cost.
We know you're going to ask that question, and you're not going to like our answer because, again, it depends.
depends.
However, let's see if we can give you some guidance. As a matter of fact, we have another video coming up that talks about costs, right?
Yeah.
And if I tell you it's going to be $300 to $600 a square foot, that's not very helpful.
Mhm.
But that really is that range potentially.
Including permits.
Yeah. So the permits is actually not that bad. So we kind of break them down into soft costs and hard costs, right? Soft costs are things like permit fees, architect fees, structural engineer, HVAC designer, that sort of stuff. And the good news is that a lot of those development charges have already been eliminated, right? So you don't have, as per Bill 23, you don't have parkland dedication fees and other charges when you're doing 3 units and under, sort of that gentle densification. So that's kind of the soft cost. And then with the hard costs, it's actual labor and materials to build this thing. Okay. And I would say that's probably 90% of your cost, or even higher, 95%. The number that we have, it really depends on the size. So the larger the unit, the lower the per square foot price. Whether you build a 600 square foot garden suite or you build a 2,500 square foot home, this per square foot cost is going to be cheaper on the larger home because a furnace is going to cost the same. A electrical panel is going to cost the same. Connecting certain services are going to cost the same. So these days, if you were to ask somebody how much does it cost to build a standard home, let's say your typical 2,000 square foot, they may give you kind of in the range of a very basic home could be $250 to $350 a square foot, right? That's probably standard, right? So now that if you're building a garden suite, you're going to be probably north of 350, and that's going to be the low end. So on a per square foot basis, you can start looking at that number right now, right? In spring 2023. That's a moving target, right? So 6 months from now, that could be different. I think from a per square foot basis, anything that you're building that is between 600 square foot to 1,000 square feet, it's going to be very difficult, unless you are a contractor and you have great relationships with trades to really get close to that $300 a square foot mark. So I'll give you the number that it was in the 450 square foot range, $450.
And that's a hard cost, right? So
yeah.
anything else is
Actually, no, that include the soft cost as well. So soft cost was only around $15,000.
And that's to do what? 1,000 square feet?
Less. It was 650 square feet.
So that's still like 250,000-ish, 300,000.
Yeah, 275.
And those type of costs currently is not financeable, right? To the bank. Like you need to pull the line of credit, or you need to have a.
There are some lenders that are looking into it, providing construction loans. It's more challenging to get construction loan. Obviously, the rate's going to be higher. You have to do it in segments. There's fees associated with each segment that you withdrawal. Also, they want to know that you have this ability to build, right? So if you're a investor, even if you're an experienced investor, you've done many renovations, building from the ground up is a different thing. So they're going to want to know, how are you going to be doing this? Are you going to be hiring the foundation contractor and the framer, or are you going to be hiring a builder? If you're going to be hiring a builder, they want to make sure they have all the proper licenses, Terion, all that stuff, right? So it is more complicated. So back to your question about financing. Most people that are doing it right now, most of our clients that are doing it right now, they have equity that they can tap into either on that property or on another property where they're able to self-finance. It just kind of makes more sense at this point. And what they're after is they're trying to boost their cash flow.
If you think about it, it actually makes sense, right? Because it's at the end of the day, it's the ROI. Does it make sense to actually do that to build something that's on your current lot, or does it make sense for them to use that money and allocate it to another property? Right now, everything has gone up so much. So for people who are unable to actually pull enough equity to use that as a down payment plus renovation for a different project, this might be a better option. A better investing option for themselves.
Is the exit strategy often that they will just refinance it because they've increased the value? You've either made your property a duplex or a triplex. And you said, generally speaking, it's a lot easier for 3 units and under, meaning for that 4th unit, you have to go get variance. You have to go get permission, right?
Here in Hamilton, for the 4th unit, you do require parking.
Yeah.
So if you're not able to provide that, then variance would be required.
Yeah.
The 3 unit and under is not easier, but well, I mean, there are certain ways of course it's going to be easier, but what I had mentioned earlier is that the development charges are exempt for 3 units and under Bill 23.
Yeah.
So Bill 23, their mandate is they would consider 3 units and under to be gentle densification, which is essentially exempt from all development fees.
Okay. Which actually, I think we should talk quickly about Bill 23.
Sure.
Okay. So let me just straight up ask the question, because this will be good for like our short form video too.
Yep.
What is Bill 23?
Okay. So Bill 23 is a provincial mandate that received, I guess, royal assent this past year. A lot of headlines, a lot of news coverage on it. And it is really a big development bill that is focused on all types of development, right? So traditional development would be condos, single family homes, but embedded within that, there's a lot of benefits to small scale, small infill development as well. And, we're interested in additional suites. So the big thing within that package would be, for the kind of work that we do for a lot of the investors that are within our network, is allowing them to do 3 units and under as of right. This has already been in the mandate in the past several years with Bill 108. Now it's doing them and also exempting the development charges, as we had mentioned. So that's definitely one big factor. And then making them as of right all residential neighborhoods, which means that it used to be only 2 units. Now you can do 3 internally or within ADU, like a detached unit.
And this is obviously in their effort to, I guess, increase the densification. I know that people are talking about, making it so that they're not spreading onto the green belt, or even just solving the housing crisis, right? Just to make it easier for people to increase densification in smaller communities, right?
Correct. Yeah, it's just one additional solution. We have to utilize all solutions, right? So they're going to continue to build regular houses, they're going to build condos, and this is a way for people to essentially, at a grassroots level, to be able to build more housing. Like if every house in Ontario just built one extra accessory unit, whether it's a basement or attached, you're going to be double the amount of housing by 2.6 million, right?
Yeah.
Which is more than exceeds what the mandate is provincially. Obviously, it's only going to be a small percentage of people that do them, but it's still going to potentially make a big impact if people are provided with the resources and solutions to be able to kind of do this on their own.
So optically, I think, at least when you hear something like that, it almost sounds like anybody who's doing real estate investing, even people who go and they want to flip houses, it almost seems like you can buy these single family homes, make them a legal duplex in the existing structure, because a lot of them can accommodate that.
Right.
And then you can have an ADU in the back, right? And it seems like then almost every property can effectively be a triplex, and you don't even have to deal with a parking requirement, generally speaking, right? So that is the potential.
Yeah. So the parking is still something that a lot of municipalities are pushing for. You're along the right lines in terms of what you're saying, is that it's easier to essentially convert a single family home to 3 units.
Is there anything that, in terms of Bill 23, you find that people aren't aware of that adds huge benefits to real estate investors? Does it blanket across like all municipalities? Because I think still there's some resistance in some municipalities and not all of them are covered under Bill 23, right?
Yeah. So the mandate is that all municipalities have to comply.
Yeah.
And I think the current provincial government is going to be enforcing it more. Whereas in the past, other bills like the second suite bill back in 2012, that hasn't been enforced as hard. So they will be required within their bylaws to say, how are you going to allow these?
Mhm.
right? So from an investor standpoint, what I would recommend is, just all the strategies that we recommend. In the next few years, there's still going to be a lot of folks that, have homes but aren't aware of these opportunities. And I don't think they're necessarily priced in when they're selling. That's an opportunity for investors to look at a potential property where the seller or the realtor were not aware of those opportunities, whether it's something internal or whether it's an accessory unit.
Yeah.
And taking advantage of that right now. Even though I know it's hard because we're at like record low inventory,
Yeah.
but there are still properties that just people don't recognize that there's that opportunity.
Well, there's all these countryside properties that I would imagine that with large pieces of land that they can probably add multiple units to it. Like technically speaking, from the way it's sounding, would you be able to add 2 ADUs, which would essentially be 2 separate houses, to a large enough plot of land? Let's say out in the country. Would that be something that might be?
Yeah.
feasible?
So rural properties have different rules. So what we described here with Bill 23 primarily is within the urban boundaries of each municipality, and so rural properties would be governed differently.
Okay, so people
Right? So
should
they
not look
might
at that.
have. Yeah. So I don't feel comfortable providing too much information. I just don't have a lot of
Okay.
data there. But it's something to, we've had people reach out to us to say that, they have a large piece of land and, maybe there's some farm property that they're looking at and they already have a structure that they want to build new. And I definitely recommend that they look more into it. Those are interesting opportunities as well, especially if it's, within a close proximity to the urban boundary.
Okay, Andy, you're a very seasoned investor. You've done many different strategies. What is your most recommended strategy in 2023?
That's a tough one. Max Suite strategy. I would say go on that approach, right? Take the lowest hanging fruit. If you can do a second suite on the house, that would be the first step. I don't really have anything new, to be honest. Like it's just kind of doing the same thing, which is maximize your existing property. If you have the ability, that's excellent, right? Because that's how you kind of slowly accumulate, kind of small incrementally. We want to also let people know that it's possible to do it in a phased approach, and which is what I do myself. A lot of our clients do is that they'll do one unit, they'll refinance, get the tenants in there, get the lease going, get the income, and then they will refinance and take that to the third unit, fourth unit. But you just want to have that plan, right? It could be something that's going to take 4 years or 5 years to do, but you want to have that plan. You can incrementally grow, right? You don't have to, you can take it slow. You don't have to do 5 properties in 1 year, right?
For people who have in-law suites, generally in the basement, is it easy to get that converted into a legal unit, self-contained?
I assume that when you say in-law suite, there's a kitchen down there and there's no separation
And doesn't have its own separate entrance necessarily.
Yeah. So technically, an in-law suite, a lot of city bylaws will call something an in-law suite, but there's nothing really in the building code that allows for that. So if you have a separate kitchen, essentially that's a separate unit, and you need to legally have it separated. But to answer your question, if it was done properly, like there's proper insulation, the electrical wiring was done properly, the plumbing was done properly, then yes, it should be conversion to a legal second unit.
How do suite additions help to combat urban sprawl?
Because our focus is on densifying existing neighborhoods, which essentially is combating urban sprawl. We take existing structures and try to maximize it to allow comfortably the most amount of people.
With this form of suite additions, especially with garden suites, these are often small homes. Do you think that there's any problem, and something that seems maybe counterintuitive, that we live in Canada, we have so much land, and we're creating smaller and smaller units for people to live in. Do you think that there's any problem with this, or is it just a matter of perspective?
Yeah, I think it's a matter of perspective. Andy and I talk about this a lot. Just the way that our neighborhoods are designed, the existing infrastructure is there, but it's not being utilized to its max potential. For us to create, plow down green land and build more houses, it becomes more and more unaffordable the more you sprawl. So why not utilize what we currently have to provide more housing?
Yeah. So one of the things that I would encourage your audience to look into is a organization called Strong Towns. Right, they're based in the U.S. and they really talk about the damaging effects of urban sprawl. At a very high level, yes, it makes sense. We have so much land in Canada. Why don't everybody just have 5 acres for themselves? Right. The reality is that we don't live in individual silos. We gather as humans. Right. So we need social contact. And we just physically do not have the infrastructure to be able to build in that manner in a long-term basis that is financially sustainable. Because for us, we just visually see a house and the people living there. But embedded within that infrastructure is, roads, sewers, utilities, ongoing maintenance. So all those sorts of things in a long-term basis, it's been proven over and over again when you look at the financial models that over a period of time, it starts failing. and cities start defaulting on the services such as road maintenance. And that's what we're seeing right now. Like all the cities are in debt because they're trying to fix roads and they're just not very efficient. Over time, that doesn't work. And the way we combat it with additional suites is to say, let's utilize that existing infrastructure, build more, right? And it's not just better financially, it's also better socially because people are connected. It's better environmentally because now you have more people living on the same amount of land. It's a great way environmentally to have more people in a certain land, much better than any type of energy efficient product you can use. It's just to reduce the number of per capita consumption, both in building materials and energy consumption.
It is a smaller footprint.
100%. Yeah.
If anybody wants to get in touch with you guys, how do they go about doing it? Social media, website, email, what's the best way?
Yeah, all of that. So suiteadditions.com, you can go to the site, check out our services there. We have free guides that you can download. Deshaun works very hard with our video content. So we have a YouTube channel, try to put a new video out every week, just try to educate and get the message out to people. You know, we're happy that people use this information and they work on their own. They work with their contractor, with their designer, but we're also happy if they reach out to us and then potentially hire us for consulting and design work as well.
It's perfect. I'm sure they will. Guys, it was really great having you on the show.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, our pleasure. Thank you.